Draco Malfoy and the year when everyone suddenly paid attention to him. My Draco will hear about this. Chapter 14. Out of Luck. Harry didn't stop to let him catch up, and it was only then that Draco realized that he was chasing someone. At the far end of the corridor, he could see a tall, long-haired figure with billowing robes, and a shorter, narrower figure with short hair in school uniform. Snape and Nott. Draco noticed that the battles he was racing through were slowly breaking up too. The Death Eaters were retreating, joining Snape, and Draco was panicking. Had Nott accomplished his mission? What had he done? Where was Dumbledore? When had he and Harry returned? Harry followed the retreating Death Eaters down staircase after staircase, and Draco tore after them, his heart racing. On the last staircase to the entrance hall, Draco heard various explosions, the shattering of glass, the crashing of stones. And when he reached the scene, he realized that 2 Death Eaters, the Carrows, he believed they were called brother and sister, had taken it upon themselves to smash the hourglasses displaying the house points. The colored gemstones were scattered all over the floor, along with the glass, and Harry was just sliding out of the door, having overtaken them. They looked up when they saw Draco, though, and grinned at each other. Draco immediately realized that while they probably had orders not to touch Harry Potter, no such orders existed for Draco Malfoy.
Well, look who came to play,
the woman leered, twisting her wand. Draco had no patience for this. He fired a blasting spell at the ground in front of them, making the glass and stones fly up into their faces. They screamed, covering their eyes, and it gave Draco just enough time to navigate past them, minding the slippery floor, and slip outside. As he stepped out onto the front steps, he quickly surveyed his surroundings and let out a gasp at what he saw. Hagrid's hut was burning, large clouds of smoke rising up from it and disappearing into the darkness. Not far from the scene, Harry was on the ground, wand out of his hand, and Snape was leaning over him. He immediately knew that the display was threatening. Maybe the remainders of the potion running through his system were telling him. Draco did not think. He started to run. In his momentum, he fired a stunning spell at Snape, but his teacher must have seen him approach because he deflected his magic easily and countered it with a disarming spell, leaving Draco wandless too. He did not stop running, though, and before he knew it, he was on the ground with Harry throwing himself across his chest. "If you want to kill him, you have to kill me first!" he panted, glaring up at Snape. He heard Harry garble something underneath him, probably a protest, but he elbowed him in the ribs. Something about his actions seemed to snap Snape out of whatever craze he had been in. He stared at Draco for a long moment, and then he stepped backwards, pulling back his wand. He shook himself as if trying to dislocate a memory, and then he turned his back on them and took off into the forest without another word. They lay there for another moment, just breathing heavily, before Harry whispered incredulously, "Draco, what the hell?" "Well," Draco said, turning to face him, eyes wide, "I wasn't going to let him kill you!" "So you were going to let him kill you?" Harry demanded, green eyes blazing with emotion. "I wasn't thinking, okay? I just panicked!" "Obviously, you weren't thinking!" Harry yelled, pushing out from underneath his body, his expression twisted in fury. "Don't you dare try this again! I don't need more people I love sacrificing their life for me, do you hear me?" "All right, I'm sorry," Draco muttered, properly chastised. "It was a reflex." "A reflex?" he hissed, but his voice cracked and Draco realized that he was shaking. "Harry," Draco said softly, reaching out for him. He touched his shoulder gently. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean to upset you, I just..." In that moment, though, Hagrid emerged from his burning house, Fang in his arms, striking Draco properly dumb because he had not even realized Hagrid was still inside Merlin's balls. They did not speak as they helped Hagrid extinguish the fire on his house, but Draco kept glancing at Harry. He looked horrible, pale and sickly in a way that reminded Draco of the night Sirius had died, and it did not bode well. This couldn't have been just the shock of Draco's instinctive urge to sacrifice himself for Harry. He had to be missing some vital piece of information. "It's not so bad," Hagrid muttered, voice hopeful, as he surveyed the damage on his house. "Nothing Dumbledore won't be able to right?" Draco looked back at Harry, his heart sinking, as Harry seemed to grow even paler at the mention of Dumbledore's name, confirming Draco's suspicion. He couldn't help but reach out for Harry's hand, enfolding it gently in his. "Harry?" he breathed. "Hagrid," he brought out finally. He He gulped, and Hagrid was now looking at him instead of the still smoldering building.
"What happened, Harry?" he asked. "I just saw them Death Eaters running down from the castle, but what the bloody hell was Snape doing with them? Where's he gone? Was he chasing them?"
Harry cleared his throat and Draco's insides clenched. That Harry had such trouble bringing out the words could only mean the worst.
Hagrid, he killed.
"Killed!" Hagrid called, eyes widening. "Snape killed? What's your number, Harry?"
But Draco already knew before Harry opened his mouth. He could only stare in horror as Harry filled in the missing piece.
Dumbledore.
Harry ground out, sounding lost.
Snape killed Dumbledore.
Silence fell upon them. Both Hagrid and Draco stared at Harry, though where Draco was horrified, Hagrid was uncomprehending.
"Dumbledore what, Harry?"
he asked finally.
He's dead.
Harry repeated, voice cracking.
Snape killed him.
"Don't say that!"
Hagrid shook his head, his voice rough.
"Snape killed Dumbledore. Don't be stupid, Harry. What makes you say that?"
I saw it happen.
Draco flinched at that, looking away back at the castle, only to twitch when he saw the dark mark hovering over the astronomy tower. Bloody hell! When did that happen?
"You're good enough."
Hagrid still argued.
I saw it happen.
"What must have happened, Hagrid?"
Draco interrupted him sharply, catching his eyes and nodding to the dark mark.
"What?"
Hagrid frowned, but then his eyes widened, and he was moving without another word, making his way up to the school. Draco looked at Harry, hesitating. He took a shaky breath before following Hagrid, though at a more moderate pace. Hagrid was moving straight for the open entrance door, probably intending to go straight for the astronomy tower, but Harry pulled Draco off path, leading him into the grass and to the foot of the tower. It was only then that Draco realized that a body lay there on the ground. It felt like he was going to be sick.
"Harry! Draco!"
Hagrid called.
"Where are you going?"
Harry did not stop, though, and finally they reached the crumpled, broken shell of what had once been their headmaster. Harry let go of Draco's hand and crouched down beside him, and Draco stared in horror as he straightened the old man's crooked glasses with trembling fingers, wiped the trickle of blood from his mouth with his sleeve. It was Harry's way of showing his last respect, Draco knew, but he felt frozen, his mind reeling with the terror of the realization that Dumbledore was really dead. What were they going to do? Hagrid had reached them, and he let out a moan of pain and shock next to Draco. Meanwhile, Harry picked something up from the ground. A locket, Draco thought, and observed it with a blank look on his face, turning it over and over before opening it and drawing a folded piece of paper from inside. As he read it, his face crumpled, his eyes flooding with tears, and Draco fell to his knees next to him, pulling him into his arms. He did not get to read the note before Harry crumpled it in his fist, but it didn't matter. Not right now. Not when Harry turned his face into his neck with a sob and cried. Ginny and Ryan were the ones who eventually came to pick them up. It still needed a lot of coaxing from Draco for Harry to leave Dumbledore's side, and even then, he had to keep his arm firmly wrapped around him and lead him away. Ginny's own hand was holding tightly onto Ryan's, the only tell that she too needed some form of support, but she was bravely pushing on, leading the way to the infirmary as she filled them in on the news.
"Everyone's gathered at the hospital wing," she explained. "It's McGonagall's orders."
Ginny,
Harry muttered, his voice breaking.
who else is dead?
"Don't worry, none of us,"
She told him quickly.
But the dark mark. There was a body.
"That was probably Bill, but it's all right. He's alive."
And Draco, too, took a shaky breath at that, flashes of his run-in with Greyback coming back to him.
Will he be okay?
Draco asked. He won't be...
"We don't really know what the after effects will be,"
Ginny muttered, and her voice was trembling a little now. Ryan squeezed her hand.
"I mean, Greyback being a werewolf, but not transformed at the time."
Greyback?
Harry interrupted, eyes wide.
Yeah,
Draco nodded.
he almost got to me, too. But Lupin protected me.
Harry looked ready to faint at the mere thought, so Draco felt compelled to add,
That potion you gave us worked wonders, Harry. Everything seemed to just miss us, and I took out a remarkable number of people myself. Not to mention that
Whenever I didn't, people just seemed to appear out of nowhere to do it for me.
Yeah, Ryan snorted. You're welcome.
Draco sent him a weak smile, and Ryan grinned back, though it looked a little tired too.
But there were others.
Harry muttered, looking at Ginny again.
There were other bodies on the ground.
Neville, Abbas, and Yatten are at the hospital wing, but Madame Pomfrey said they'd all make a full recovery. 2 Death Eaters are dead. One got killed by a killing curse the huge blonde was firing off everywhere, and the other was hit by a brick in the head when a curse made the wall explode. We have a couple more Death Eaters unconscious, so we can hand them over to the Ministry later. But our side came off remarkably well. I think it's because the odds were in our favor. We had the Death Eaters outnumbered 1 to 3 in most fights, Ryan snickered. Even if 2 of the 3 were still students, that counts for something.
They had reached the hospital wing, and Ginny was pushing the doors open for them to enter. Draco had never seen the infirmary this full, and he was stunned that Madame Pomfrey had allowed it. The beds near the door were occupied. On the right side, Abbas and Yatten were sitting propped up, both awake. On the left side, Neville was sleeping. Most students were gathered around them, having pulled up chairs to huddle together, holding whispered conversations. The only exception were Hermione and Weasley, who were standing with Dora and Lupin at the far end of the ward around a bed that apparently held Bill. They all looked up when the 4 of them entered. Hermione broke away to run towards them, pulling both Harry and Draco into a tight hug. Lupin approached them too, his face anxious.
"Are you all right?"
he asked, looking from Harry to Draco.
"We're fine."
Harry nodded.
"How's Bill?"
Nobody answered. Draco bit his lip and chanced to look at the bed, his stomach turning when he saw that his face had been so badly mangled that it seemed unrecognizable. Madame Pomfrey was dabbing some foul-smelling green ointment onto his wounds, her face serious.
"Can't you fix him with a spell or something?"
Harry asked anxiously.
No, child, we'll work on this.
Madame Pomfrey shook her head.
I've tried everything I know, but there is no cure for werewolf bites.
But he wasn't bitten at the full moon, Weasley noted, his voice hopeful. Going back out and transformed, so surely Bill won't be a real...
He looked at Lupin for confirmation, who sighed deeply.
No, I don't think Bill will be a true werewolf, he agreed. But that does not mean there won't be some contamination. Those are cursed wounds. They are unlikely to ever heal fully, and Bill might have some wolfish characteristics from now on. Dumbledore might know something that'll work, though, Weasley said, and Draco flinched. Or is he? Bill fought those maniacs on Dumbledore's orders. Dumbledore owes him. He can't leave him in this state.
Ron, Dumbledore's dead,
Ginny said, efficiently interrupting her brother's rant, much to Draco's relief.
No!
Lupin called, shocking Draco with the intensity of his reaction. He looked wildly from Ginny to Harry to Draco, as if hoping someone might contradict the statement. But when only silence followed, he collapsed onto the chair next to Bill's bed, burying his face in his hands. It made Draco feel even more helpless, watching Lupin lose composure like that.
How did he die?
Dora finally broke the silence, catching Harry's eyes.
How did it happen?
"Snape killed him,"
Harry said, his voice brittle.
"I was there. I saw it. We arrived back on the astronomy tower because that's where the mark was. Dumbledore was ill. He was weak. But I think he realized it was a trap when we arrived. He immobilized me. I couldn't do anything. I was under the invisibility cloak. And then Nott disarmed him."
Hermione looked completely anguished. Weasley groaned. Ryan cursed. Everyone else listened in complete silence.
"And Snape did it. The Avada Kedavra."
Harry's lips trembled as he fell silent, apparently unable to go on. Draco pulled him closer against him, and Harry accepted the comfort greedily. In a corner, Madame Pomfrey burst into tears, and Ginny tried to shush her. Through the windows, bits and pieces of a phoenix song reached their ears. Fawkes seemed to be lamenting his owner's death. The door opened and McGonagall entered the ward. She looked shaken up and as if she was holding herself together by strings.
Molly and Arthur are on their way,
she announced. She then turned to Harry, asking him for details on Dumbledore's death, and Draco stroked Harry's back as he was forced to recount again how Snape had killed Dumbledore, giving McGonagall such a shock that she swayed on her feet.
Snape,
She muttered.
we always wondered, but he trusted. Always. Snape! I can't believe it.
Snape was a highly accomplished occlumens,
Lupin reminded them, his voice hard.
We already knew that.
But Dumbledore swore he was on our side.
Dora whispered, despaired.
I always thought Dumbledore must know something about Snape that we didn't.
He did.
Harry muttered, making everyone turn to him, including Draco. Harry's lips were drawn into a tight, angry line now, and he wasn't meeting anyone's eyes.
Snape passed Voldemort the information that made Voldemort hunt down my mom and dad. Then Snape told Dumbledore he hadn't realized what he was doing. He was really sorry he'd done it. Sorry that they were dead.
And Dumbledore believed that, Lupin demanded, incredulous. Dumbledore believed Snape was sorry James was dead. Snape hated James.
And he didn't think my mother was worth a damn either,
Harry muttered.
because she was Muggle-born. Mudblood, he called her.
Draco felt so out of the loop. How did Harry know all of these things? When had he found out? Why had he never told Draco about them? But now was not the time to ask. Not in front of everyone, and not while everyone was still busy discussing Snape's betrayal.
We should never have notified him, McGonagall muttered. If we hadn't called him to join the fight, he wouldn't have.
He's head of house and an order member, Minerva, Dora reasoned. You couldn't have not called him.
So when the fight broke out, did he immediately join the Death Eaters?
Harry asked, looking at Draco.
We think so.
Draco shrugged and proceeded to fill Harry in on everything that he had missed from their side, with the occasional help from some of the others. They caught Harry up just in time for Mr. and Mrs. Weasley's arrival. They stormed in, Fleur in tow, making everyone immediately fall silent. Lupin and Dora hastily stepped away from the bed to give the family space as McGonagall spoke to Mr. Weasley about the likely after-effects of the injury, and Lupin quickly joined the conversation. Miss Weasley placed herself on the chair next to the bed, teary-eyed, while Fleur stood at the foot of the bed, looking very pale. Draco felt deeply uncomfortable watching the private family moment, and he looked over his shoulder at where his Slytherin friends and Luna were still huddled together near a bus in Yatin's beds, again in whispered conversation. He wondered if it would be rude to stroll over and join them when an angry exclamation from Fleur made him freeze up.
And what do you mean by that?
Draco blinked and whipped his head around again to see that Fleur had regained some of the colour in her face. She also wore an expression of indignity as she glared at Miss Weasley.
What do you mean he was going to be married?
Miss Weasley looked utterly startled, and Draco couldn't blame her. He didn't think the Weasley matriarch was off a challenge like that.
Well, only that you think Bill will not wish to marry me anymore? Fleur pressed. You think because of these bites he will not love me? No, that's not what I... Because he will, she snapped, staring down at her future mother-in-law harshly. It will take more than a werewolf to stop loving me.
Well, yes, I'm sure,
Miss Weasley muttered, obviously flabbergasted.
but I thought perhaps, given how he...
You thought I would not wish to marry him, or perhaps you hoped, she spat. What a wackaroo looks. I am good looking enough for the both of us, I think. All these cards show that my husband is brave, and I shall do that,
she concluded, snatching the ointment Miss Weasley had picked up out of her hands and taking her place in dabbing Bill's wounds. The room was dead silent for a moment. Then, very tentatively, Miss Weasley spoke up.
Our great-aunt Muriel has a beautiful tiara, goblin-made, which I am sure I could persuade her to lend you for the wedding. She is very fond of Bill, you know, and it would look lovely with your hair.
Draco chanced to look at Jenny, who looked like she had bitten into a pus-flavored Bertie Bott's.
Thank you, Fleur said rather stiffly. I am sure that will be lovely.
And in the next moment, the two women were lying in each other's arms, crying to their heart's content, and Draco shook his hand in wonder. "Are you sure you want to marry into that family?" he muttered to Ryan, who elbowed him.
We've been dating for a couple of weeks, he hissed. Stop sending out wedding invites, Marlin!
He opened his mouth to return something, but the sudden sound of Dora's raised voice had him come up short.
You see? She called, her eyes fixed on Lupin. She still wants to marry him, even though he's been bitten. She doesn't care.
Oh, Draco muttered. So we're doing that now, okay. It's different, Lupin said. He had tensed up noticeably and was avoiding everyone's eyes. Bill will not be a fair werewolf. The case isn't completely...
But I don't care either. I don't care. Tonks called, and she grabbed Lupin by the front of his robes to shake him. I told you a million times.
And I've told you a million times that I am too old for you, too poor, too dangerous.
I've said all along you're taking a ridiculous line on this, Ravens.
Miss Weasley told him with a small smile.
I'm not being ridiculous, Lupin snapped. Tonks deserves somebody young and whole.
But she wants you, Mr. Weasley shrugged. And after all, Remus, young and old men do not necessarily remain so.
He waved towards the bed where his son was currently resting in, a sad look on his face.
Point taken, Dora nodded, glaring at Lupin. Besides, if Draco can date Harry, who, let's be real, has the biggest hit sign out of all of us on his back, then I can very well date you.
How did I know we'd get dragged into this eventually? Draco muttered, looking at Harry, but the other one didn't smile. He was still rather pale as he watched the scene before him. This is not the moment to discuss it, Lupin sighed, averting everyone's eyes. Dumbledore's dead.
Dumbledore would have been happier than anybody to think that there was a little more love in the world.
McGonagall told them decisively, as if that closed the subject. And it did in a way, because at that moment Hagrid walked in, announcing that he had moved at Dumbledore's body, and that the Ministry's been informed, and it set everyone in motion. She asked all students but the Weasleys to return to their dormitories. The lockdown had been lifted, but she filtered out Harry to lead him to Dumbledore's old office, claiming to want to talk to him in private before the Ministry arrived. So Draco, naturally, did not return to Slytherin with his housemates. Instead, he waited in front of the gargoyles until Harry appeared. Harry looked drained and exhausted, but much to Draco's relief, he immediately wrapped his arms around Draco's waist and buried his face in his throat, taking a deep breath. They stood like that for a long moment, just embracing. What did McGonagall want? Draco asked. To know what Dumbledore and I were doing tonight, and what mission he gave me, he muttered without pulling away. Did you tell her? He checked. No, Harry said simply. Draco nodded, not surprised. They were talking about closing the school. Well, crap, Draco sighed, closing his eyes. They might let us stay until the funeral, but they'll send us home immediately after. I guess it makes sense, Draco said slowly. After all, many parents will have lost their trust in Hogwarts as an institution without Dumbledore around. Harry didn't answer, and he just continued holding Draco. Draco pressed his lips against his forehead. Will you come back to Gryffindor with me tonight? Harry asked softly. I don't want to sleep alone. Okay, Draco nodded, relieved that Harry had asked. They made their way up to the Gryffindor Tower. Fingers entwined. The fat lady did not question the fact that he was bringing a Slytherin student into the common room. Instead, she asked, Is it true? Dumbledore? Dead? Yes, Harry whispered. She let out a wail and swung open to admit them. In the common room, Hermione and Weasley were sitting by the fire, apparently waiting for them. Draco and Harry sat with them wordlessly. They're talking about closing the school, Harry told him. Like Brit said they would. Weasley nodded. There was a pause before Hermione asked very tentatively, Harry, before you returned, did you and Dumbledore... Harry shook his head, his face twisting into a pained grimace. You didn't get it? Weasley asked, looking crestfallen. It wasn't there? No, Harry muttered. Someone had already taken it and left a fake in its place. Somebody was already there? Draco blinked stunned. But who? That would mean someone else is after the Horcruxes. Rather than responding with words, Harry pulled the locket he had picked up from the ground next to Dumbledore's corpse earlier out of his pocket and gave it to Draco. Like Harry had done, he opened it to reveal the slightly crumpled note, unfolding it and reading. Next to him, he could feel Hermione and Weasley sidled up to read over his shoulder. To the Dark Lord, I know I will be dead long before you read this, but I want you to know it was I who discovered your secret. I have stolen the real Horcrux and intend to destroy it as soon as I can. I faced death in the hope that when you meet your match, you will be mortal once more. R.A.B.
R.A.B., Weasley whispered. But who was that?
And did they manage to destroy it? Draco asked. If not, where is the real Horcrux?
I could look for the initials tomorrow at the library,
Hermione offered.
see if I come up with anything.
The question is if we need to look amongst possible Death Eaters or amongst people who stood up to him. He frowned. Because that person, the way he or she writes, doesn't it seem kind of
Affectionate?
Hermione offered.
Yes, it does.
better check Death Eater records first then?
Draco nodded. He looked up at Harry, at the way he had sunk it back into the armchair and folded the note up again, placing it back in the locket.
Let's get to bed, he decided. We all need rest.
The others agreed easily, and they bid their goodnights, Weasley, Harry, and Draco making their way up to the 6th year's boys' dormitory. Finnegan and Thomas were still sound asleep, and Longbottom's bed was empty. Weasley quietly slipped into the bed near the door, and Harry led him to the bed on Weasley's right, near the window. Draco followed Harry's lead, shucking his robes, shirt, trousers, and socks, and only climbing into bed after Harry in his pants, since he hadn't brought his pajamas. Harry didn't reach for his either, though, apparently craving the skin-to-skin contact, and Draco was glad to give it to him. He sprawled out on his back and pulled Harry to his chest, allowing the other boy to rest half on top of him and use him as his personal body pillow. Harry was asleep almost as soon as his head fell to his shoulder, his whole body relaxing. Draco marveled for a while longer at the comfort of Harry's body draped over his before slowly drifting away too, focusing on Harry's even breath and trying to think of nothing at all.